Well, good afternoon, friends, and welcome to my fourth video blog about the story behind Alpha and Omega. And here I am back in my music therapy room at Three Ways Academy here in Bath. A little bit of an Aladdin's cave, but it's nice to be back here working with my very special young people. The last video blog ended a bit abruptly. It seemed like YouTube was saying, you've had your time, now stop. And of course my 15 minutes was up and I hadn't realized. But I was caught at a rather important moment because I'd been describing to you these concerts through the Baltic states where we presented Alpha and Omega in this amazing week that the BBC referred to as 6 days that changed the world, and they weren't talking about Adrian, I can promise you, but this time of historical change. When the Russian tanks had left Moscow and were heading to the Baltic states to effectively to make a statement about their dominance in that area. And nobody knew what was going to happen, least of all us. But the brief anecdote I wanted to mention was that during that tour, we were performing in a little town called Skies, which was in Latvia. And we were in this theatre, packed. And as we reached the song Guns of Peace, which, as you know, begins with that military intro, the relentless drum beat and then the screaming guitars and the wailing saxophone, suddenly, overhead, literally above the theatre, there came a Russian military jet, and it just roared across our heads. And the sound was so loud that it almost submerged this introduction to Guns of Peace. I'll never forget this. I don't think the audience will either, because if ever the word prophetic was appropriate, I think that was what was going on there. It was as if on one hand you got the sounds of human might and power and aggression, and then in this little theatre, in this little town, you had God's words saying effectively, part of me, a world so full of wonder. I poured out my love for you. What have you done to my world? So an amazing memory. We came back, of course, to England, and over the next few years, we continued to tour with Alpha and Omega. Another highlight, I would say, was British cathedrals. We toured through 8 different cities here in the United Kingdom, and that was amazing because we hadn't tried to stage that work in cathedral buildings that are a great challenge, but also if you can get it right, they are so beautiful, and so full of history. You know, some of those buildings are 700, 800, 900 years old. So when you sing in these places, you are joining, if you like, with the voices of tens of thousands over many hundreds of years. That's the feeling you have. If the walls could speak, what would they tell us? But we came to the point of feeling it was time to not exactly move on, but to pause in the more intensive touring with Alpha and Omega. And the decision was that we would have a very special event in a very special venue, the Royal Albert Hall in London, that we would invite singers from the choirs who'd been part of this for many years, and we would stage Alpha and Omega in that glorious venue right in the heart of London. To my delight, 600 people responded to the invitation to be part of our choir. The core choir was Reflex from Norway, who were just wonderful, and they sort of carried the energy of the work so beautifully. And we had a pretty full house. But importantly, as well as the performance of Alpha and Omega, this was about introducing people to, let's say, the next chapter in my spiritual and musical journey that had begun all those years ago in Bergen-Belsen. And it was the album Song of an Exile. And I've been working on this for a couple of years. It had all begun with the 2 poems that are at the heart of Song of an Exile, Fear by Eva Pikova and Terezin by Hannes Hachenberg, both 2 children who'd been in the Terezin concentration camp and then taken to Auschwitz, where both had died. But their poems had lived on. And I'd found these poems in the Children's Memorial at Yad Vashem. And it was all that time ago, on that first visit to Jerusalem, that although that was about Alpha and Omega, I remembered thinking to myself, one day I would just love to set some of these poems to music as part of a journey, let's say, at that stage, into how Jewish children viewed the Holocaust, how they dealt with, how they coped with what was going on around them. When Song of an Exile was born, it had become effectively a work using Jewish authors, Jewish poets, to tell their own story. And the two children's poems were at the heart of that. But that was the next part of my journey that I wanted my audience to hear. So the decision was made that we would have Alpha and Omega in the first half, and then we would open people's ears to Song of an Exile. Well, the concert was absolutely beautiful. The venue is absolutely wonderful anyway. It just felt like singing those songs with a 600-piece choir and an audience, many of them who knew the work and sang along in certain places. An incredibly fitting end to that first chapter in the story. And I remember that night staying in a hotel somewhere in London, just so filled with gratitude for the journey that had come to this point. I said that Song of an Exile was, if you like, the second part of my journey into these things. And I think it's very important to say that, yes, the writing and recording of Alpha and Omega was just the beginning. It was just the beginning of an incredibly fundamental part of my spiritual awakening into many things, too many to mention in these blogs. But suffice to say, after Alpha and Omega, there was Song of an Exile, but what was coming later was, I think I'd describe it as the third part of the trilogy, really, and that was City of Peace. And City of Peace would not have been there if it hadn't been for Alpha and Omega and Song of an Exile. You know, and in total, we're probably talking about a period of 10 years, maybe more than that, during which those works came to fruition. So I'm going to leave it there, and the next and final vlog will bring us up to where we are now with the story of how it came to be that we decided to re-record Alpha and Omega, and hopefully the work that you're now getting familiar with, the 30th anniversary recording. So thank you so much for listening to this, and see you pretty soon. Bye.